Lobbert here. Check the description to skip to the commanders or to the start of the game. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more Pauper Commander content. I put a lot of effort into these videos because I want to earn that from you. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here, I'd love it if you became a patron. I only charge when I create an edited gameplay video, which is about every 2 weeks, so your support directly motivates me to keep doing what I'm doing. Special thank you to Brad for hosting the game. Check out his podcast, the PDH Pod. It's a great source of Pauper Commander news, tips, and tricks. Some news with that, I will be hosting these games myself going forward. Join me each Monday on Twitch at 5 PM Mountain Time. A link to my Twitch channel is in the description. Now let's see what each player brought. Infamous Fridge is going first with Keldon Warlord, a star human barbarian for 2 red, with Keldon Warrior's power and toughness are equal to the number of non-wall creatures you control. Going second is Derek with Sorcerer's Broom, a 2/1 artifact spirit for 2, with whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you may pay 3. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Sorcerer's Broom. Lobbert is going third with Cunning Nightbonder, a 2/2 human rogue or 2 hybrid blue-black, with flash, and spells with flash you cast cost 1 less to cast and can't be countered. And going last is Bradrak V with Spiritmonger, a 6/6 beast for 3 black-green, with whenever Spiritmonger deals damage to a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Spiritmonger, and the ability to pay a black to regenerate Spiritmonger. It also has the ability to pay a green to make Spiritmonger the color of your choice until end of turn. Lobbert and Brad both take a mulligan, but keep their second hand of 7. Infamous Fridge starts the game by drawing for turn, playing a mountain and Blisterspit Gremlin. He passes. Derek draws, plays Quicksand as his land for turn, and passes. Lobbert draws a card, plays Submerged Boneyard as his land, and passes. Brad draws for turn, plays Evolving Wilds, which he uses to put a tapped swamp into play, and passes. Infamous Fridge draws, plays a mountain, and Bitter Reunion, which lets him discard a mountain to draw 2 cards. He then passes. Derek draws a card, plays Terminal Moraine as his land, and then plays his commander, Sorcerer's Broom. He passes. Lobbert draws for turn, plays an island, Nurog Stealth Suit, and passes. Brad draws, plays a Thriving Boar naming green, and passes. Infamous Fridge draws a card, plays a mountain, and Ornithopter of Paradise. He passes. Derek draws for turn, plays a Waste, and Howling Golem. He attacks Brad for 2 commander damage, and passes. Lobbert draws, plays Cunning Nightbonder, and Demir Aqueduct, which returns an island to his hand. He passes. Brad draws for turn, plays a forest, and enchants a swamp with Overgrowth. He passes. In his end step, Infamous Fridge activates Blisterspit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents. Infamous Fridge then draws for turn, plays Dwarven Mind as his land, which puts a 1/1 dwarf creature token into play. He then plays Cathartic Reunion, discarding 2 mountains to draw 3 cards. Next, he plays Pristine Talisman and passes. Derek draws, plays a Waste, and Bonder's Ornament. He then attacks Infamous Fridge with a 2/3 Howling Golem, and Brad for another 2 commander damage with Sorcerer's Broom. Howling Golem triggers, so each player draws a card. Brad and Infamous Fridge each take 2 damage, and Derek passes. Lobbert draws a card, plays an island, and ends his turn, discarding Suffocating Fumes to hand size. Brad draws, plays a swamp, and Shambling Ghast. He then plays Voracious Typhon, and passes. In his end step, Infamous Fridge activates Blisterspit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents. He used Pristine Talisman, so he gains 1 life. Infamous Fridge then draws for turn, plays Opal Palace as his land, and his commander, Keldon Warlord. He then passes. Derek draws, plays Terramorphic Expanse as his land, and attacks Lobbert for 2 with Howling Golem, which triggers, so each player draws a card. Lobbert flashes in Crookclaw Transmuter, which switches the power and toughness of Infamous Fridge's Ornithopter of Paradise when it enters, which kills it. He then blocks Howling Golem. The creatures trade, and Derek ends his turn. Lobbert draws a card, plays an island, and passes. Brad draws, plays a forest, and his commander, Spiritmonger. He then attacks Derek with Voracious Typhon. Derek takes 4. After combat, Brad enchants Spiritmonger with Rancor and passes. On his end step, Infamous Fridge activates Blisterspit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents. He used Pristine Talisman, so he gains 1 life. Infamous Fridge then draws for turn, plays a mountain, and Lathnu Sailback. He passes. In his end step, Derek activates Bonder's Ornament to draw a card. Derek then draws for turn, plays a Desert, and Lightning Core Excavator. He then plays Automatic Librarian, which lets him scry 2 cards to the top. He then passes. In his end step, Lobbert flashes in Cloaked Siren and attaches Nurok's stealth suit to it. He then draws for turn, plays an island, and moves Nurok's stealth suit to his commander. Next, he attacks Infamous Fridge with his 3/2 with flying. Fridge does not block, and Lobbert flashes in Ophidian Eye, enchanting his Cloaked Siren. Infamous Fridge takes 3 damage, so Lobbert draws a card off of Ophidian Eye. He then passes. Brad draws, plays a forest, and enchants a swamp with wild growth. He then plays Trailblazer's Torch, which gives him the initiative, so he puts a swamp into his hand from his deck. He then equips Trailblazer's Torch to Spiritmonger and attacks Lobbert with Spiritmonger. Lobbert plays Consider, which surveils Scattered Thoughts into his graveyard and lets him draw a card. Lobbert then takes 8 damage, and Brad passes. On his end step, Infamous Fridge activates Blisterspit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents. He used Pristine Talisman, so he gains 1 life. Infamous Fridge draws for turn and plays Keldon Raider, so he draws a card and discards Warden of Geometries. Next, he plays Warlord's Fury, which gives his creatures first strike this turn and draws him a card. He then sacrifices Bitter Reunion to give his creatures haste. He attacks Brad with everything. Brad plays Moment's Peace, so Brad takes no damage. Infamous Fridge passes. Derek draws a card, plays a Waste, and passes. Lobbert draws, plays an island, and attacks Brad for 3 with Cloaked Siren. Brad takes 3, so Lobbert draws a card and takes the initiative, which puts a swamp into his hand. He passes and discards a land to hand size. Brad draws for turn, plays a swamp, and Thorn of the Black Rose, which gives him the Monarch. Brad asks Lobbert if he can have the initiative if he only attacks for 1. Lobbert agrees, so Brad attacks Lobbert for 1 with Shambling Ghast and Derek for 8 with Spiritmonger. Neither player block, so Brad takes the initiative, which puts 2 counters on Thorn of the Black Rose. He passes and draws off of the Monarch. Infamous Fridge draws and plays Scrapwork Mutt, so he discards Havoc Devils and draws a card. He then plays Mana Geode, which lets him scry a card to the bottom. Next, he plays Turret Ogre, which deals 2 damage to each of his opponents. He passes. On his end step, Derek sacrifices Terminal Moraine to put a Waste into play tapped, and pays 3 to copy Sorcerer's Broom. Derek draws for turn, plays a Waste, and prized Statue, so Derek gets a treasure token. He then passes. On his end step, Lobbert plays Thirst for Meaning to draw 3 cards and discard Alexi's Cloak. He then flashes in a Windstrider. Lobbert draws for turn, plays a Swamp, and attacks Brad with Cloaked Siren. Brad pays 4 for Snuff Out to destroy it. Lobbert pays 2 to move Nurok's Stealth Suit to Cloaked Siren. Snuff Out does not resolve, so Brad takes 3. Lobbert draws a card off of Ophidian Eye, flashes Eel Umbra onto Windstrider, takes the Monarch, and the initiative. He chooses to put 2 counters on Windstrider, passes, and draws off of the Monarch. He discards a Swamp to hand size. Brad draws and plays Savage Swipe to have Spiritmonger fight Cunning Nightbonder. Lobbert targets Spiritmonger with Into the Royal. Spiritmonger is returned to Brad's hand, and he gets back Rancor. He replays the Spiritmonger, enchants it with Rancor, and attacks Lobbert with a death-touching 3/5 Thorn of the Black Rose. Lobbert takes 3, so Brad takes the Monarch and the initiative. He chooses to goad Infamous Fridge's commander and passes. Infamous Fridge draws a card, plays Tavern Brawler, and targets Keldon Warlord with Assault Strobe to give it double strike this turn. He then attacks Lobbert with a double striking 7/7. Lobbert flashes in Blessing of Leeches on Windstrider and blocks. He regenerates the Windstrider, so it becomes tapped. Infamous Fridge passes. On his end step, Derek sacrifices Terramorphic Expanse to put a Waste into play. He pays 3 to copy each of his Sorcerer's Brooms. Derek then draws for turn, plays Warped Landscape and Chromatic Star. He then plays a Rozka Relic, which gives him the city's blessing. Derek passes. Lobbert loses 1 life to Blessing of Leeches, draws, and attacks Brad with Cloaked Siren. Brad takes 3, so Lobbert draws off of Ophidian Eye, takes the Monarch, and gains the initiative, which he uses to goad Brad's Spiritmonger. Brad targets Spiritmonger with Snakeskin Veil to give it hexproof and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Lobbert passes, and draws off of the Monarch. Brad draws a card, plays a Forest, and Night's Whisper, so he loses 2 life and draws 2 cards. He then equips Trailblazer's Torch to Spiritmonger and asks Lobbert if he can take the Monarch in initiative for 1 damage. Lobbert declines. Brad goes to combat and attacks Infamous Fridge with his trampling 9/7 Spiritmonger, and Lobbert with his 3/5 with Death Touch. Lobbert blocks with Windstrider and regenerates it with Blessing of Leeches. Thorn of the Black Rose dies. After combat, Brad plays Tyrant's Choice. Lobbert responds by flashing in Fairy Duelist, which gives Spiritmonger -2/-0 until end of turn. Tyrant's Choice resolves, so Brad votes for Torture. Infamous Fridge votes for Death. Derek votes for Death, and Lobbert votes for Torture. so each of Brad's opponents lose 4 life. Brad passes. On his end step, Infamous Fridge activates Blister Spit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents and gain 1 life off of Pristine Talisman. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and exiles a mountain to Tavern Brawler. He draws for turn and asks Lobbert if he can have the Monarch and initiative for 1 damage. Lobbert says no. Infamous Fridge attacks Brad with his 7/7 commander and Lobbert with a 2/1 Scrapwork Mutt. Lobbert flashes in Drudge Reavers. Brad casts Sprout Swarm to make a 1/1 Sapperling token. Each player blocks with their new creature. Lobbert activates Drudge Reavers to regenerate it. Infamous Fridge's Scrapwork Mutt, and Brad's token dies. Infamous Fridge unearths Scrapwork Mutt, so he discards a mountain, draws a card, and passes, so Scrapwork Mutt is exiled. In his end step, Derek flashes in Spiked Pit Trap, sacrifices Chromatic Star for a green mana, so he draws a card off of Star leaving play, and pays 3 to copy Sorcerer's Broom twice. Derek draws for turn, plays Haunted Fengraf as his land, and Thermal Navigator. He passes. On his end step, Lobbert flashes in Stormrider Spirit. Lobbert then untaps, loses 1 life to Blessing of Leeches, and progresses through the Undercity, choosing to draw a card. He draws for turn, and goes to combat. He attacks Infamous Fridge with a flying 6/6 Windstrider, and Brad with a flying 3/2 Cloaked Siren. Each player takes the damage, so Lobbert draws off of Ophidian Eye. After combat, he plays Waterfront District, passes, and draws off of the Monarch. Brad draws, plays a Swamp, and attacks Lobbert with his Trampling 9/7 commander. Lobbert plays Wail of the Nim, choosing to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. In response, Infamous Fridge activates Blister Spit Gremlin to deal 1 damage to each of his opponents and gain 1 life off of Pristine Talisman. He then plays Dynacharge to give Keldon Warlord +2/+0. Blister Spit Gremlin triggers, so it untaps. He activates Blister Spit Gremlin again, so each of his opponents take 1 damage. Derek sacrifices his commander to Thermal Navigator to give it flying. Wail of the Nim resolves, so Lobbert's Drudge Reavers, Brad's Shambling Ghast, Infamous Fridge's Blister Spit Gremlin, and Derek's 5 Sorcerer's Broom copies die, and each player takes 1 damage. Brad uses Shambling Ghast's Death ability to give Cunning Nightbonder -1/-1 until end of turn, which finishes it off. Lobbert flashes in Jarl of the Forsaken to destroy Spiritmonger. Brad responds by regenerating Spiritmonger, so it is removed from combat. Brad passes. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and exiles a mountain to Tavern Brawler. He plays the mountain and cycles a Forgotten Cave to draw a card. Next, he plays Cogwork Archivist. He used Pristine Talisman to pay for it, so he gains 1 life. He then passes. Derek draws a card, plays a Waste, and pays 4 for his commander, Sorcerer's Broom. He sacrifices Prize Statue to Thermal Navigator to give it flying. Prize Statue gives Derek a treasure. He goes to combat and attacks Brad with his flying 2/2 Thermal Navigator. Brad goes to 3, and Derek passes. Lobbert starts his turn, loses 1 life off of Blessing of Leeches, and progresses through the Undercity, so he reveals the top 10 cards of his deck. There are no creatures among the revealed cards, so he shuffles them into his deck. He draws for turn, plays Thriving More Naming Black, and goes to combat. He attacks Brad with the flying 3/2 Cloaked Siren, and Infamous Fridge with a flying 6/6 Windstrider. Brad flashes back Moment's Peace, and Lobbert counters it with Dispersal Shield. Infamous Fridge blocks with Turret Ogre. The Ogre dies, and Brad takes 3, which eliminates him. Ophidian Eye triggers, so Lobbert draws a card. After combat, Lobbert plays Think Twice to draw a card. He then passes, drawing off of the Monarch. Infamous Fridge starts his turn, exiles Environmental Sciences to Tavern Brawler, so Keldon Warlord gets +2/+0 until end of turn. He draws for turn, plays a mountain, and Environmental Sciences, so he gains 2 life and puts a mountain into his hand. He then attacks Derek with his 6/4 Keldon Raiders. Derek sacrifices a treasure. He uses the mana to copy Sorcerer's Broom and jump blocks the Keldon Warlord with the copy. Infamous Fridge passes. In his end step, Derek sacrifices another treasure to make another copy of Sorcerer's Broom. After that, he sacrifices a Rozka Relic to gain 3 life and draw a card. He pays 3 to copy Sorcerer's Broom. Next, Lobbert plays Agony Warp to kill Lightning Core Excavator. Derek draws for turn, plays a Waste, and plays Eola Pile. He then plays Armillary Sphere and Staunch Throne Guard, so he becomes the Monarch. He passes and draws off of the Monarch. On his end step, Lobbert targets Windstrider with Repulse to return it to his hand and draw a card. Lobbert starts his turn and progresses through the Undercity, which puts an island into his hand. He then draws, plays an island, and Pestermite, which taps Infamous Fridge's Cogwork Archivist. Lobbert then attacks Infamous Fridge with a flying 3/2 Cloaked Siren. Infamous Fridge takes 3, so Lobbert draws off of Ophidian Eye and passes. On his end step, Infamous Fridge gains 1 life off of Pristine Talisman. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and exiles Chain Whip Cyclops to Tavern Brawler, so Keldon Warlord gains +5/+0 this turn. He then draws for turn, plays a mountain, and attacks Lobbert with a 10/5 Keldon Warlord. Lobbert chump blocks with Fairy Duelist, and Infamous Fridge passes. On his end step, Derek sacrifices Aeola Pile to deal 2 damage to Lobbert and pays 3 to copy Sorcerer's Broom. Lobbert responds by flashing back Think Twice to draw a card. Lobbert takes 2 damage from Aeola Pile and is eliminated. When Lobbert is eliminated, Infamous Fridge gains the initiative, so he puts a mountain into his hand. Derek draws for turn, plays Study Hall as his land, and passes, drawing off of the Monarch. In his end step, Infamous Fridge gains 1 life off of Pristine Talisman. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and triggers Tavern Brawler, which exiles Fling. Keldon Warlord gets +2/+0 this turn. He draws for turn, plays a mountain, and targets Keldon Warlord with heightened reflexes to give it +1/+0 and a first strike counter. Derek responds by activating Spiked Pit Trap to deal 5 damage to Keldon Warlord. Infamous Fridge responds by sacrificing Keldon Warlord as an additional cost to play Fling, targeting Derek. Derek takes 7 and is eliminated. Congratulations on your victory, Fridge. Thank you for watching until the end. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more Pauper Commander content. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here, I'd love it if you became a patron. Check out my Pauper Commander playlist for more edited videos like this one. Shout out to my one and only patron, Bill, Too Much Do. Thank you.